My experience is that most people do not want to sit at the head of the table. I have been to many dinner parties when it is usually the last seat that is taken. Customarily, it is reserved for the host, and no one would dare presume to sit there unless invited, and even then, most would refuse it. So what is Jesus talking about in today's gospel? Well, a place of honor can mean more than just the seat at the head of a dining room table. And parables always point us to something bigger, and this one points us to humility. Humility is the opposite of pride, and pride is the root of all evil. So, of course, Jesus would say, "For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, while the one who humbles himself will be exalted." Jesus speaks about humility throughout the Gospels, and he himself humbled himself, becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. But what does this parable have to say to us today? Well, it draws our attention to several temptations that are prevalent in our culture. The first is entitlement. Entitlement is the mindset that a person is owed something, or that he or she has a right to something because of who they are or what they have done. This attitude is a major problem because it forgets one very important fact, that everything that we have is a gift from God. Plus, nobody likes a person who expects to be treated in a certain way because of his or her status, intellect, or skills. In fact, most people respect leaders who would never ask a subordinate to do something that he or she wouldn't do. I have a friend whose son started working for his construction company after college, and you would never know that he is the boss's son because he works hard and right alongside all of the other employees, and does not expect to be treated differently, even though someday he might inherit the company. In the big scheme of life, we are not entitled to anything, including eternal life. We can't earn it, nor do we deserve it, but we strive for it by doing the will of God, who desires nothing less than our salvation. In a world that is filled with people who are self-absorbed and are told repeatedly how special they are, we can easily fall into the temptation that we deserve something without earning it, and after earning it, demand to be treated differently than everybody else, and forget that we are all sinners in need of God's mercy. Another temptation we often face today is playing the victim. Now, sadly, there are many people who are victims today. Victims of crime, victims of abuse, victims of deceit, infidelity, and lies. But to play the victim is something altogether different. This trend blames someone or something else for one's problems, or demands sympathy, or even retribution, or repayment because things didn't turn out the way one planned them, or because of bad choices that one refuses to face the consequences. Well, I hate to break it to you if you haven't figured this out already, but there are disappointments in life. Things don't always turn out the way we planned. We live in a fallen world. None of us expect bad things to happen, but they often do. It's part of life. Humility helps us when we are faced with problems and difficulties because we can lean on our faith and the belief that God, who is the source of all that is good and holy, enters into our pain with us and our suffering and gives us a path through this vale of tears. With his love and his mercy, we are never victims, but joint heirs with him in the life of grace. And finally, this parable reveals to us the temptation of greed. Now, when we think of greed, we automatically think of money or material things. The accumulation of goods and pleasures and wealth is a huge problem today. Many people define themselves based on their possessions. But greed can take many different forms. St. Ignatius of Loyola, who lived in the 16th century, struggled with this himself before he had a conversion and changed his life completely to follow Christ. He was obsessed with his appearance. He was consumed with lust, and he worried about his reputation, wanting to be honored and adored by everyone. He suffered from what he would later call disordered attachments. A disordered attachment is an emotional dependence on a person, an object, or an activity more than what reason would allow, and it interferes and frustrates our dependence on God. St. Ignatius desired to overcome his disordered attachments, and he coined the phrase agere contra, which means to act against. When we identify our disordered attachments, whatever they may be, he says that we must press aggressively in the opposite direction, agere contra, and act against them. For example, do you have physical attachments that get in the way of being available to God and doing his will? Things like food or drink, sex, medications, exercise, or sleep. Do you have emotional attachments? Like, is your first response to stress, fear, worry, pain? Is it anger? Do you complain a lot? Is hyperactivity your response by which you hope to fix everything? What is your median attitude? Must you always look on the bright side, even when you need to deal with something that is not so positive? Or do you go immediately to the worst case scenario? Do you keep yourself apart from others so that you can observe and judge rather than engage or risk? Do you feel that everyone depends on you all the time? My brothers and sisters, the gospel today calls us to agere contra, to act against pride and embrace humility, to be like Christ, who humbled himself and took the form of a slave to save all of us. We cling to him and to him alone, now and forever.